I was pulling out of the driveway just past 7:45, feeling like my lungs had forgotten how to work properly, when she stepped out onto her porch with a tea mug in one hand and stared at the cargo rack, the extra fuel container, the camping chairs strapped down in the back, all of it. She said, "Looks like you're skipping the country." I laughed and cut the engine for a second. That's the plan. For months, I'd been working on that truck in the evenings and on weekends. New belts, patched cables, tires, radiator hose, the little camp stove in the back that barely lit, the small sleeping platform I built lopsided the first time and had to tear apart and start over. It was old and loud and difficult, but it was mine. That trip was supposed to be mine, too. No agenda, no deadlines, no reporting to anyone. Just me, the open road, and enough miles to stop feeling like I was living the same week on repeat. Maya leaned against the porch rail and looked at the truck like it had done something personally wrong to her. "And you honestly think this thing survives half the country? It just has to survive the neighborhood first," I said. She smiled into her mug. Maya always carried herself in a way that made you more conscious of your own posture. Even standing there in an old faded hoodie and worn-out jeans, hair pulled back in a loose bun, she somehow looked more composed than anyone dressed for a boardroom. She was older than me by nearly a dozen years, separated, reserved most of the time, and not the kind of person I ever imagined trading jokes with from my front yard. I shrugged and said, "Mostly kidding. Come with me and find out." She didn't even pause. She just said, "All right." I looked at her. "All right, like, actually all right? All right, like, give me 20 minutes. I actually laughed because I figured she was still pulling my leg, but she set the mug down on the porch rail and walked back inside. Just turned and vanished like it had all been arranged. I sat there with the engine ticking, both hands on the wheel, half wondering if I should just drive off before she reappeared, and said she was joking. She didn't. 17 minutes later, she came down the steps with a canvas bag, a jacket knotted around her waist, sunglasses pushed up on her head, and that same unreadable expression like she was heading to the farmer's market, not getting into a truck with her neighbor for a trip neither of us had discussed for more than a minute. I reached over and pushed the passenger door open. "Maya, are you actually serious?" She tossed the bag in. "Dead serious." "What about work?" "I've got PTO saved up." "Your place? It'll be fine." I studied her face for another second. "You genuinely want to do this?" That's when something shifted in her expression. Less playful, more real. She said, "Luke, if I walk back in there, I'm going to spend the entire morning reorganizing a closet that doesn't need it. So, yes, I genuinely want to do this." That was enough. She got in, pulled the door shut, and the whole cab changed instantly. It had smelled like rubber and dust and old coffee before. Now there was her conditioner mixed into it, and her bag wedged by her feet, and her knees nearly grazing the glove box, and suddenly the trip I'd been imagining solo for months didn't feel solo anymore. We cleared town laughing louder than either of us intended. At the first fuel stop, she came back with stale gas station coffee, trail mix, and 2 wrapped breakfast burritos she swore were essential for road morale. She made fun of my printed directions even though she was the one who lost signal 15 minutes later. I caught her rifling through the storage bins in the back seat while I drove, critiquing my organization system like she'd been hired to audit it. By midday, it felt strangely natural, like she'd always been riding shotgun. Then the temperature gauge crept upward. At first I told myself it was nothing. Old engine, hot asphalt, long climb. But a minute later the needle pushed further, then further still, and Maya sat up straighter and said, "Luke, I can see it." "You definitely see it." "Appreciate that. Very useful." Steam leaked from under the front lip of the hood just as I eased onto the shoulder. Gravel crunched under the tires. The engine gave one rough shudder when I switched it off, and then everything went quiet except for semis blasting past hard enough to rattle the windows. For a second, neither of us moved. Maya turned slowly and looked at me. "Well, strong opening." I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel and laughed once. Mostly because the other option was swearing until I ran out of words. When I climbed out and lifted the hood, a wall of heat hit me square in the face. Coolant had sprayed across half the engine compartment. I stood there staring at it, hands on my hips, trying hard not to feel like an idiot. Months of work, half a day into the road. Maya came around to my side and stood next to me, squinting into the engine like either of us could fix it through sheer frustration. She said, "Give me the optimistic version first." The optimistic version is it got a little overenthusiastic. And the honest version? I exhaled slowly. Coolant line fitting, maybe. Maybe something worse. She nodded once. Okay, then we deal with the honest version. That was the first moment it stopped feeling like a loose, impulsive adventure and started feeling like something real. Hot pavement, rotten luck, no clean solution, her standing there anyway. Traffic kept flying past. The sun kept hammering down. Maya grabbed the water jug from behind the seat without being asked and held it out, then ripped open a bag of pretzels and announced we were not having a breakdown on an empty stomach. I should have felt frustrated or embarrassed or wished I'd left alone like I'd originally planned. Instead, I remember looking over at her in that heat, hair whipping around her face, half smiling like this disaster was somehow exactly where she wanted to be, and thinking the trip had already turned into something I hadn't anticipated. We were still on that shoulder nearly an hour later, both of us dusty, damp with sweat, running on pretzels and pure stubbornness, when I finally got the fitting sealed well enough to risk it. Maya held the work light steady even though it was the middle of the afternoon mostly, so she could lean in close and say things like, "That looks like it costs money, and you have the expression of someone pretending this is totally fine." "It is totally fine," I said. She glanced at the wet patch on my shirt, then at the small drip pooling under the engine. "Absolutely." But when I turned the key, the engine settled into a steady idle. Not great, not clean, just steady enough to feel worth betting on. I stood there listening for any bad noise. Maya came around and handed me the last of the water. Verdict. I looked up the road ahead, then back at the truck. Verdict is we drive like two people who have recently developed a deep respect for limits. She grinned. That is not how you were driving this morning. By evening, we were nowhere close to where I'd planned to stop. The breakdown had swallowed the better half of the day, so I turned into a small campsite alongside a stretch of scrub pines and a narrow lake that looked considerably more beautiful in the last light than it probably deserved. We set up the chairs, boiled pasta on the small camp burner, and for about 20 minutes it felt like the trip had found its footing again. Then the sky shifted. Maya spotted it first. That doesn't look right. I turned and saw the clouds moving in thick and low, dark enough to drain the color out of the water. The wind hit suddenly, knocked the paper plates off the table, sent a napkin sailing into the tree line. Perfect, I said. The first drops were fat and slow, warm at first, then colder and heavier, and then it wasn't scattered drops anymore but a solid curtain of it. We both dove for the gear bins and loose bedding at the same time. Maya grabbed the food bag. I yanked the folding table half shut and nearly caught my own fingers in it. She was laughing while trying to rescue the coffee canister, which made me laugh too, even with everything going sideways. "Why are you laughing?" I yelled over the noise. "Because this is genuinely terrible." The truck cab turned chaotic the second we started piling things inside. Wet jackets, muddy shoes, bags, half-packed supplies, chairs draining onto the floor mat, both of us trying to peel off soaked layers without catching each other with an elbow. Rain pounded the roof so hard we had to raise our voices to be heard. Maya sat on the edge of the sleeping platform with my backup blanket pulled around her shoulders and rainwater still tracking down one side of her face. "I want it noted," she said, "that your legendary road life is exactly what you sold it as." I handed her a dry pair of socks. "You could still turn back." She looked up at me from under the blanket. "I'm not turning back over some rain and undercooked pasta." That landed harder than it probably should have. We barely slept. The air inside turned close and warm. My lower back ached. Maya claimed more than her share of the blanket and denied it without blinking. Sometime near first light, the storm finally pushed through, leaving everything outside gray and soaked and dripping. We made coffee in the side doorway in that strange stillness that follows a rough night, both of us too tired to pretend we looked anything but wrecked. Maya took a sip and grimaced. "This is genuinely bad." then drank more anyway. She stopped.
No.
Then kept going. That became the rhythm of the next 2 days. Nothing went the way it was supposed to, but somehow it kept getting better anyway. We missed a turn because I was watching the road while she was telling me about the first place she rented after the separation. This narrow studio above a dry cleaner where the heat pipes knocked all night long. By the time we registered how far we'd drifted, the paved road had thinned and roughed out, and then dissolved into one of those unmarked back roads that seems to exist only because no one thought to close it off. I should have been irritated, but where it dropped us was remarkable. Not famous, not on any list, just a wide-open overlook above a river bend with not another soul around. We stood there eating chips from a gas station bag and looked out at it like we'd actually earned the view. Maya nudged my shoulder with hers. See, your terrible navigation delivers. That was intentional navigation. Still counts. That night we pulled into a small rough site off the main road and finished the last of the decent food we had left. It was quiet enough to hear every small sound in the dark. Maybe too quiet. I was closing up the cooler when Maya went still and pointed past me.
There.
She whispered. I saw nothing at first, then caught movement near the edge of where the light reached. Something low and fast, nosing around the bag, where we'd set the bread. Not large, but confident enough that we both froze. Maya grabbed my arm without thinking about it. Fingers wrapping around tight and quick. Don't move,
she said.
Which would have been funnier if she wasn't the one holding on hard enough to bruise. I stepped forward slow, made noise, banged the lid against the side of the truck. The animal shot off into the brush, taking half a loaf with it. Maya let out one long breath and then started laughing. That bone-tired kind of laugh where you're one beat away from crying just as easily. We are completely hopeless at this, she said. We are actively improving. She was still holding my arm. Neither of us said anything about that right away. When she finally let go, it was slower than it had to be. We stood there close together in the low light, both worn out, both filthy, both smiling like the trip had quietly become something it hadn't started as. By that point, it didn't feel like I had a passenger anymore. It felt like every wrong turn and soaked night and ridiculous roadside repair had steadily, without either of us deciding it, put us on the same side of everything. The first time I truly understood how far gone I was happened in a motel parking lot that smelled like wet pavement and old cooking oil. The weather had turned again that afternoon, and after another hour of pretending we could push through it, Maya looked over at me and said, I am done proving I can suffer for the adventure. That sounds reasonable. I want 4 walls. I want a hot shower. I want a bed that doesn't fold out of your storage cabinet. I found the first cheap place with a vacancy sign flickering in the rain. The room was tight. The carpet had lived through better decades. And the air conditioning unit made it sound like it was 1 degree from dying. But when Maya stepped into the shower, and I came out 20 minutes later in an oversized sweatshirt with damp hair and no road grime on her anymore, the whole room felt different. Too small suddenly. We ate vending machine food on the bed because the diner across the lot had already locked up. Maya sat cross-legged near the headboard, picking at a bag of pretzels. And I was on the edge of the mattress, pretending I was very focused on the local weather report, playing with no volume. She watched me for a second and said, You've been off for like an hour. I have not. You absolutely have. I looked over at her. Maybe I'm just worn out. She gave me that flat look she used when she knew I was deflecting.
Luke.
That was the problem with being on the road that long. After enough hours together, there was nowhere left to hide. She knew when I was irritated, when I was anxious, when I was acting like something didn't bother me. And I knew she knew. So I said the clumsy version because it was the only version I could actually get out. This stopped feeling casual a while back. Maya didn't respond right away. She set the pretzel bag down beside her and looked at me in a way that made my chest go tight for no clear reason. Then she said quietly, I know. That should have made things easier. It didn't. I laughed once and ran a hand over the back of my neck. Okay,
good.
That somehow makes it worse. That pulled a real smile out of her. She moved closer. Not dramatically. Just enough that our knees were touching. You think I got into your truck because I wanted better scenery? I figured maybe you were going through something. I was,
she said.
You were just there at the right moment. There was a pause after that. Not uncomfortable exactly, just full. Then she added, and somewhere between the broken coolant line, the storm, getting turned around, and almost losing our food to something in the brush, I started losing track of what my regular life even felt like. I turned toward her a little more. Is that a good thing? It is when regular felt like being half numb. That landed heavier than any long speech could have. Maya never talked like she was performing for an audience. When she said something honest, it stuck. She opened up then more than she had before, about how hollow the last few years had been without it looking like anything was wrong from the outside. Work, home, errands, the same quiet evenings, the same polite exchanges, the same low feeling that she had quietly become someone who just maintained things. A house, a routine, a version of herself people recognized. Nothing catastrophic. That was almost the harder part. I got too good at just getting through it, she said. That's all. I didn't have something wise lined up. I just said, you don't seem half numb with me. Maya looked at me for a long moment, and then she leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't hurried. That was what stayed with me. After all that motion, all those miles, all those small stupid disasters, it happened in a way that felt almost still, like we were both finally letting go of the act we hadn't realized we were still performing. After that, the room went quieter. The rain outside, the struggling air unit, her hand against my arm, my throat dry for no good reason. Nothing about it felt like a fling or some reckless thing people do when they're far from home. It felt like something we had already been building without giving it a name. In the morning, the money situation became real in a way that wasn't amusing anymore. I sat at the small table near the window with receipts, gas costs, the motel charge, and what I had left running the numbers twice because I didn't trust the first answer. Maya came out of the bathroom pressing a towel to her hair and took one look at my expression. That's serious? We have to be smarter. I said, a lot smarter. She crossed the room and sat beside me. No alarm, no blame, just show me. So I did. We cut everything unnecessary. Basic food. Fewer paid stops. No more casual detours unless the road forced them. I hated admitting I'd gotten it wrong. Months prepping the truck, mapping the route, thinking I had it figured out. Maya listened through all of it, then pushed some folded cash from her bag across the table. I looked at it. No. Yes. I'm the one who invited you. And I'm the one who came, she said. This belongs to both of us now. I started to push back, but she put her hand over mine and kept it there.
Luke.
Stop trying to hold the whole thing by yourself. That should have stung my pride. Instead, it did something worse. It made me start picturing something I had no business imagining yet. Not just the remaining miles. Not just another night parked somewhere quiet. Something beyond all of it. We still snapped at each other later that afternoon when the truck picked up a new rattling sound and I pulled over too sharply onto gravel. I told her not to stress. She told me that saying don't stress wasn't the same as having an actual solution. I said I did have a solution. She said my solution appeared to be glaring at the engine until it felt bad about itself. 5 minutes later, we were both laughing because she wasn't wrong. That was when I understood this wasn't just something manufactured by nice scenery and distance from ordinary life. Problems kept finding us, and every single time they did, we turned toward them side by side. No performance. No scorekeeping. Just two people with both hands on the same problem. That night, parked under a cleared-out sky with the doors open to cool air. Maya rested her head against my shoulder and said, I'm starting to dread the idea of this being over. I didn't answer immediately because the honest answer felt too large. Then I said, yeah, me too. And for the rest of that evening, with the road still stretching out ahead and home far enough away to not think about, the truck didn't feel like a vehicle anymore. It felt like a life we had stumbled into without planning it. And neither of us wanted to be the first one to call it something that ends. The final stretch home was the most difficult part of the whole trip, which felt deeply unfair after everything else we'd pushed through. By then the road had worked us into a rhythm that didn't need thinking. Maya handed me coffee before I thought to ask for it. I checked the truck at every fuel stop without being reminded. We packed faster, cleaned up faster, argued less, and somehow understood when the other one needed silence. Should have made the drive back feel easy. Instead, it made every mile feel like something being spent. Because now we both knew what was sitting at the end of it. Not some dramatic collapse. Just ordinary life. Her front porch. My driveway. The same block where this whole thing had started as a throwaway joke. The truck started giving us trouble again about 2 hours from home. Nothing enormous at first. A rough pull to one side. Then a shudder. Then a sound from underneath that made my stomach drop. I eased us onto the shoulder and switched it off before anything could escalate. Maya looked out through the windshield for a moment, then settled back in her seat. Of course. I laughed once. Yeah, of course. We climbed out into hot wind and highway noise. And I slid halfway under the truck on the thin mat I kept folded in the back. Grit in my face. Metal ticking as it cooled. My shirt plastered to my back. Maya crouched alongside, handing me tools, holding the light steady, asking short questions when I needed them, and going quiet when I didn't. It turned out to be something loose in the mounting bracket and a belt that had drifted just far enough to cause grief, without snapping completely. Not catastrophic. Still enough to burn through time and patience. My hands were dark with grease by the time I got back out. Maya stood and held out the water bottle. You look terrible. Thank you. You're welcome. I drank half of it without stopping. Then I looked at the truck, then at the road ahead, then finally at her. We can still make it. She nodded, but she wasn't looking at the truck. She was looking at me with that same level expression she'd had in the motel room when we both stopped pretending. We got back on the road near sunset. Neither of us said much after that. Not because anything was wrong between us. More because it wasn't simple anymore. Home was getting closer with every mile, and the question we'd managed to keep just ahead of us the whole trip was now sitting right there in the space between the seats. Was any of this only real because we'd been moving? When we finally turned onto our street, it hit harder than I expected. Her house first on the right, mine just after. Same yards. Same mailboxes. Same quiet neighborhood that had felt so small the morning I left. I pulled up in front of my place and killed the engine. The silence after that many miles felt almost wrong. Maya didn't reach for the door handle. Neither did I. I stared at my hands on the wheel and said, "So, I guess this is where everything goes back to the way it was." The second it came out, I regretted it. Maya stayed quiet long enough that I finally turned to look at her. She had one hand resting on her bag, but hadn't lifted it. Then she said, "I don't want the way it was." I didn't answer because I wasn't entirely sure I'd heard correctly. She let out a slow breath and looked past me through the windshield at both houses sitting there. I mean every word of that. I do not want to walk back in there, unpack my bag, and act like this was just some spontaneous thing I did for a couple of weeks before going back to my regular schedule. My pulse was loud enough to feel ridiculous. "Maya. No, let me get this out right," she said, and there was a small unsteadiness in her voice. Not much, just enough to make it real. I stepped out that morning because I was exhausted from feeling invisible inside my own life. And somewhere on this trip, with all the chaos and the rain and the breakdowns and the terrible food and you arguing with this truck like it could understand you, I started feeling like myself again. She looked at me then.
Directly at me.
Not the version that keeps everything managed.
Me.
I had nothing smart to say. All I had was the truth. Then stay came out rougher than I intended. Maya held my eyes for another second, then let out a small disbelieving laugh. Like she'd been waiting the entire drive back for one honest reason not to walk back into the old version of things. She reached down, lifted her duffel from the floor, and instead of pushing open her door, she shoved it behind my seat.
Just like that.
No long moment. No drawn-out hesitation. Just a decision. I looked at the bag, then at her. "That's it." She smiled. "That's it. Would you have the courage to leave your old life behind? Tell me in the comments. You're really not going home?" She glanced once toward her house, then back at me. "I am home,"